I'm the awarded for Kit Guru. Thermaltake View 51 TG Snow, i.e. white. It's got all the features our Kit Guru audience loves. So it's big, it's got loads of glass, it's got RGB, two 200mm fans in the front, one 120mm fan at the rear. Let's hit the lights and give you the full RGB bling. That's better. Costing around £200, you can install a load of liquid cooling or air cooling. It has support for 200mm fans, 140mm fans or 120mm fans in the floor, the front, the side and the roof. Loads of options. Best thing I can do is pull it apart and show you. The main glass door is tool free. Open it, lift it off. Two thumb screws for the top panel. I've already removed this panel for photos. Required a screwdriver. Once they've been out once, easy peasy. Front panel simply lifts off. Spin the case around. Solid back panel, just as you'd expect. Two thumb screws. Away that comes. You will note magnetic dust filters on these side vents. On the top, we've got this radiator rack held in place with four thumb screws, two either end. On the back, we've got a couple of features we've seen in previous Thermaltakes. So this panel can be rotated to give you vertical graphics mounting. And here we have access to hard drive trays, which can be used for 3.5s or 2.5s. Remove a load of screws from the panel. Out it comes, rotate it, and now you have vertical graphics support. Note, you do not get a PCI Express riser cable in the package. You'll have to buy that separately. If you're not interested in vertical GPU mounting, you can simply remove this support bracket like so. That's opened up the floor of the case quite significantly. We've got, these screws haven't been out, so they're going to be quite solid. There we go. One SSD mount. Two SSD mounts and a pump mount. And now the floor of the case is completely open for the installation of a radiator or fans. At the front of the V51 you can install two 200s, as you can see, or three 140s or three 120s. Seems unlikely anyone's going to take out the 200s as they're part of the price you're paying for this case in the first place. Quite slow fans rated at 600 RPM. If you choose to install liquid cooling at the front, a 360 or a 280 rad, maximum thickness according to the spec, only 30mm. Not quite sure why at the moment. There seems to be loads of space to put, frankly, pretty much any cooler you want, particularly on the inner face, but no doubt we'll discover more as we get into this. On the side, it's a similar story. You can put a 360 rad, however, that can be a chunky fella, up to 60mm. The floor is also limited in the thickness of the radiator. Again, not quite sure why. There's a load of space. Your motherboard tray obviously is here, but this section would appear to be open for pretty much any use that you want. Radiator in the roof. I mean, again, you've got space. You can understand there you've got a limitation going on. So the choice of a 360 in the floor, or at the side, or at the front, or in the roof. Crystal clear, you can't install them in all those locations because you get a certain amount of overlap. If you want a thick rad, that is the prime location. But with all the brackets and such like out of the way, you've got a load of working space. Interestingly enough, this does not support E80X. Supports ATX only. I mean, I'd have thought you could put an E80X in it for sort of hang in space, but then you'd be way over the cable grommets. Surprised by that. It's a large case, but it's an ATX case. An ATX motherboard, such as this Asus ROG Maximus Formula with the Z390 chipset. The processor on the board is an Intel Core i9-9900KF. I've installed 32GB of Corsair Dominator Platinum RGB memory. Topping it all off, we have an EK Quantum Velocity CPU block. So the motherboard and associated hardware is installed. Under the heat shield, we have an Intel 760 SSD. Around the back, we have this Thermaltake Tough Power power supply, which is RGB. not yet decided actually if I'm going to use the RGB function, as it's going to be hidden away from view. I've removed the GPU support bracket because that requires the Thermaltake PCI Express riser accessory, which I don't have. I'm considering using this Gigabyte Waterforce RTX 2080 Super graphics card with a generic PCI Express riser cable. Happens to be by Fractal, but that's a complete detail. So at the moment, my thinking is the graphics card is going to go in there, plug in, and basically hang in space, and will simply be supported by the liquid cooling hardware. Turning the case to show you that front angle, you can see there's loads of space for cooling. The question is what sort of cooling I put in the floor, the roof, the front, and the side. My chosen radiator is this Thermaltake Pacific CL360, which is a very thick 360 radiator. And at the moment, I'm intending to use the radiator in that position. I can put fans in the roof, fans in the floor. I'll leave the 200 fans in the front. And then it's a question of choosing a pump reservoir. At the moment, I'm looking at this EK Quantum Kinetic as to whether I mount it on the rad or on the front bracket. Not entirely sure about that, but this, even in its packaging, should be able to fit there without any difficulty. And if I do that, the graphics card should fit in with plenty of space as well. My question mark at the moment is why the View 51 is so large. It seems just huge. I can put in a load of decent hardware and it seems to me I've got space to spare. On the plus side, that should mean that the build's going to go nice and smooth and everything will hook together nice and easily. Fingers crossed that's true. That's the build finished, my testing is done, and I have 3 broad areas of conclusion. The first is I do not quite understand why the V51 is so large. It's just big. Having said that, it has airflow, so perhaps those two things go hand in hand, in which case if airflow requires large, I forgive the V51 for being large. As you will have seen in the video, I've used a lot of fans in this build. So in addition to the two 200s at the front, the 120 at the rear, I've added two 200s in the roof, 3 120s in the bottom, 3 120s at the side. They're all Thermaltake fans. Thermals with the specific hardware I'm using are perfectly acceptable. The biggest single problem I've got with this build is the Intel processor, which, as I said before, is a 9900KF. The associated problem is the ASUS BIOS on the Maximum 11 because they are brutal with power. Performance, I've got basically 2 scenarios from the testing. I've got out-of-the-box XMP enabled, turn off MCE and enforce all rules. That's 4.7 gigahertz, all cores, rock solid, 1.15 V core. However, the CPU is still drawing 165 watts under AIDA64 load. That's quite juicy for a processor that is rated considerably less than 165 watts, but we know the truth there. GPU drawing 195 watts. Having the door open helps temperatures by a handful of degrees. This case works. Closing the door really makes absolutely no difference to airflow. The other scenario is with XMP2 enabled and ASUS MCE enabled. That's when things get a little bit brutal. So now we're talking 5 gigahertz all cores, 1.27 V core, and now the processor is getting 187 watts. GPU is still the same territory, 195 to 200. The power draw at the wall socket is around the 520 watts mark for the entire system. Temperatures go up a few degrees, as you would expect. The thing that's really causing me problems with the temperatures is that within the CPU, the variance from core to core, it's like 15 degrees. It really highlights so much about the Intel architecture and the way they've crammed in extra cores over the last few years, going from quad-core Kaby Lake to the current Coffee Lake refresh. The graphics card, which is a gigabyte water force, therefore it's water cooled at the factory. It doesn't look anything special to my eyes, but goodness me, does it work. Temperatures, low 40s. Absolutely brilliant, just what you expect. For the past few minutes, you may well have been looking at those thermals going, well, yes, that's all well and good, but the man's got the fans upside down. The man's lost his mind. He's got the intakes at the top and the front and the exhausts at the bottom, the side and the rear, and that makes no sense. That was indeed an aesthetic judgment, so all the RGB was on show properly. I've now flipped the top and bottom fans, so I'm now intaking from the bottom and the front. I'm exhausting to the top, the side and the rear, which is more conventional. I've still got many more fans than most PCs, but this is what you would recognize as a fairly typical kind of arrangement. If I show you the true temperature figures, it looks all wrong, and it is wrong. The reason it's wrong is that ambient has changed by 4 degrees between one test session and the other. We're having some lovely warm afternoons here in the UK at the moment. If I correct for deltas, you will see that flipping the fans changes temperatures by 2 degrees C, a consistent 2 degrees. And then we come to the Thermaltake side of things. This is where I've got an issue. So I'm using a number of these controllers on the fans at the side and the fans at the bottom. These come with boxes of Thermaltake fans because the fans have proprietary connectors. They look like USB connectors, USB 2 headers. That makes sense to me because if you have a fan such as an EK Vada RGB, you have to contend with the fact each fan has a PWM header and also has an RGB header. That can be difficult. That is why EK has brought out their Loop Connect. Haven't yet used it, looking forward to that. So it's a hub for RGB and PWM, judging by the picture. Awful lot of connectors on that. My lord, 16 plus connectors? More? 20? Wow. So Thermaltake and some other companies, they use a proprietary connector on their fan, which connects to their hub, and then you control it through their software. The TT-RGB Plus software works well. I've said this previously, I think when I reviewed some of their water RAM. Their software, it's good. You've got a drop down so you tell it what it's controlling, because obviously the software doesn't know what kind of fan or whatever, memory block, pump reservoir, whatever is connected to it. So you tell it, it goes, aha. and then it's happy. That's all fine. However, if I take this other box of fans I happen to have on the shelf, they are Ring 12s. There we have a completely different control unit with completely different connectors. So proprietary connectors are one thing, I understand them, but the fact you have to have the correct fans to go the correct controller, that winds me up somewhat. If the controller that came with the V51 was one of these, even if it was devoid of the plastic casing and just the PCB on the back of the motherboard tray, I'd be fine with that, but they come up with a different setup, and that's problematic to me. I have 11 fans in this case, 2 at the front, 2 at the top, 3 at the side, 3 at the bottom, 1 at the rear. I could have added more fans if I'd gone for 120s or 140s instead of 200s. But a lot of fans. The hub that comes with the V51 is completely not up to that job. You need to use add-in hubs, assuming you're sticking with Thermaltake, but obviously Thermaltake wants you to stick with Thermaltake. That makes perfect sense. So the fact you have to add in extra hardware, I find that slightly aggravating. I wish there was one mighty hub on the case that could take, I don't know, at least 8 fans, possibly more, but 8 would be good. That would be a decent start. And then you could plug everything into the one hub, job done. Instead, I've got an ungodly amount of cabling and hardware in the back of this case, including an RGB power supply, as you saw earlier. In addition to that, I've got, let me count, I've got Thermaltake TT RGB Plus controlling all the fans in the case. I've got Asus Aura controlling the motherboard and the EK hardware, which is connected to the motherboard. I've got a Corsair memory, which is set to a default white pattern. I don't think the software is currently on this system. And I've got Gigabyte software for the graphics card. 4 different families of RGB software. The fact that it looks all right is nothing short of a miracle, but it took a certain amount of work, and I also had to keep on reminding myself what was controlled by what. Thermaltake View 51 TG Snow, it's a decent case, a lot of glass, and you can put one heck of a lot of RGB in there. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the bell button, subscribe, head over to kitguru.net to read our reviews, read news, look at photos, head to the merch store and buy a t-shirt. I'm Neil Woodard for Kit Guru. This is the Thermaltake View 51 TG Snow.